Hello everyone, welcome to Study Room. I'm Kanika and I'm your educator for this chapter in English called Mijbil the Otter. So, let's get started. Mijbil the Otter is a chapter whose author is also extremely significant to learn and know about. So, let's look into who the author for this chapter is. Gavin Maxwell, he was born on July 15, 1914 and died on September 6, 1969. He is a Scottish author and a naturalist. He is best known for his non-fiction writings and his work with otters. Let's now look into the theme of the story. The theme of this narrative is the loneliness one feels on losing a beloved pet. The narrator over here adopts an otter in Iraq as he was lonely after having lost his dog, Johnny. So, in this particular chapter, we start on the note of a thematic representation of the loneliness that an individual or a person might feel after losing one's beloved and very fond pet. It's the narrator over here who goes on to adopt an otter in Iraq as he felt extremely alone and miserable after having lost his pet dog called Johnny. Let's now know a little more about the author, that is Maxwell's otter. In the year 1956, Maxwell bought an otter from Iraq. When Maxwell took it to the London Zoological Society, it was discovered that Mijbil was an undiscovered species of smooth-coated otter. The zoologist named the otter Lutrogale perspiliata maxwelli, or Maxwell's otter. It seems that the name that the zoologist gave after discovering the rare species of smooth-coated otter that Maxwell's otter was extremely complex and difficult to remember. However, you can always remember the name Maxwell's otter. Mijbil the Otter. Let's know more about it. Early in the year of 1956, I traveled to southern Iraq. By then, it had crossed my mind that I should like to keep an otter instead of a dog, and that Camisfarna, ringed by water, a stone's throw from its door, would be an eminently suitable spot for this experiment. When I casually mentioned this to a friend, he as casually replied that I had better get one in the Tigris marshes, for there they were as common as mosquitoes and were often tamed by the Arabs. We were going to Basra to the Consulate General to collect and answer our mail from Europe. At the Consulate General, we found that my friend's mail had arrived, but that mine had not. From the map and the illustration given below, you can locate the geographical regional location of Iraq. I cabled to England, and when 3 days later nothing had happened, I tried to telephone. The call had to be booked 24 hours in advance. On the first day, the line was out of order. On the second, the exchange was closed for a religious holiday. On the third, there were another breakdown. My friend had left, and I arranged to meet him in a week's time. 5 days later, my mail arrived. So, till so far, we know of the fact that Maxwell went along with his friend to collect his mail from the Consulate General. However, his mail had not arrived. In the meantime, to also know more about the status of his mail, he not just sent an exchange on telephone, but also tried to get in touch with the people he was supposed to receive the mail from. As it happened to be so, around 5 days later, Maxwell's mail finally arrived. I carried it to my bedroom to read, and there, squatting on the floor, were two Arabs. Beside them lay a sack that squirmed from time to time. They handed me a note from my friend. Here is your otter. As you can see in the illustration below, this is what an otter looks like. So far, there have been several terms that have been used consistently in what we have learned so far. In order to understand this chapter and comprehend it well, let's look into what these terms are and learn them well. Squirmed, it means twisted about. Cabled means sent a message by telegraph. A stone's throw is a very short distance. Crossed my mind is to be thought of by somebody. Let's now continue into the chapter and see what it has in store for us. Moving on, with the opening of that sack began a phase of my life that has not yet ended, and may, for all I know, not end before I do. It is, in effect, a thraldom to otters, an otter fixation that I have since found to be shared by most other people who have ever owned one. The creature that emerged from the sack onto the spacious tiled floor of the consulate bedroom resembled, most of all, a very small, medievally conceived dragon. From the head to the tip of the tail, he was coated with symmetrical pointed scales of mud armor, between whose tips was visible a soft velvet fur like that of a chocolate brown mole. So, the moment Maxwell received the telegram and the parcel, he realized that there was a note from one of his friends which said that here is an otter for you. Before even realizing it was an otter, he felt that the sack in which the parcel came started to move in a very distinct manner. Upon realizing, he realized that it was truly an otter. He then goes on to give us an explanation and a brief description about what an otter looks like. So it has certain very symmetrical and alike pointed scales of mud around its body, and between those points, we can see a very soft velvet like fur. The otter over here shook himself, and Maxwell did not expect a cloud of dust to come out of of the otter while shaking himself. But as a matter of fact, in reality, it was not for another month that I managed to remove the last of the mud and see the otter, as it were, in his true colors. So, as it happens to be so, the otter that Maxwell received was extremely covered with mud. So, for the longest time, and despite spending so many days with the otter, he was still not able to see the actual colors of the animal, that is, the otter that he got, because he was so much covered in dust. Mijbil, as I called the otter, was in fact of a race previously unknown to science, and was at length christened by zoologist Lutrugale perspiliata maxwelli, or Maxwell's otter. So Maxwell named his otter as Mijbil. Mijbil was the name that Maxwell gave to the otter that he just received. For the first 24 hours, Mijbil was neither hostile nor friendly. He was simply aloof and indifferent, choosing to sleep on the floor as far from my bed as possible. As it had happened to be so that Mijbil, the otter, was not extremely known or familiar to Maxwell, he felt uncomfortable in being anywhere close to his bed or him. Therefore, for the first 24 hours and a day when Mijbil was with Maxwell, he did not react much to it. He was neither extremely hostile nor very friendly. He happened to just be normal and indifferent in all ways possible. The second night, that is after the first day, Mijbil came to Maxwell's bed in the early hours and remained asleep in the crook of my knees until the servant brought tea in the morning. And during the day, he began to lose his apathy and take a keen, much too keen interest in his surroundings. So when the otter realized that this is the place he's going to be at, he became a little more conscious of the fact that these are the surroundings around him and happened to be a little more aware and keen to know about what is it in his surroundings that he must be aware about. I made a body belt for him and took him on a lead to the bathroom, where for half an hour he went wild with joy in the water, plunging and rolling in it, shooting up and down the length of the bathtub underwater, and making enough slosh and splash for a hippo. So, as it happened to be so, later on, as the time went by, Maxwell took his otter to the bathroom to give him a bath. And as soon as Maxwell put his otter in the bathtub, he became extremely happy and joyous with that. As you can see from the illustration, what kind of a joyous time the otter is having in the water. This, I was to learn, is a characteristic of otters. Every drop of water must be, so to speak, extended and spread about the place. A bowl must at once be overturned, or if it will not be overturned, be sat in and splashed in until it overflows. Water must be kept on the move and made to do things. When static, it is wasted and provoking. 2 days later, Mijbil escaped from my bedroom as I entered it, and I turned to see his tail disappearing round the bend of the corridor that led to the bathroom. So, as it happened to be so, that as Mijbil entered his master's bedroom, he also realized that it was not just a time for him to be around his master's bedroom as it was sleep time, but somehow he happened to escape that area as soon as Maxwell entered the room and somehow went on to go inside the bathroom. By the time Maxwell got there, that is, in the bathroom where he saw the otter going, the otter was up on the end of the bathtub and fumbling at the chromium taps with his paws, which is to say that he knew where exactly the water came from and wanted to have another joyous time in the bathtub. Maxwell saw the otter do this. He was extremely surprised and amazed to watch it. In around less than even a minute, the otter had turned the tap far enough to produce a lot of water, and after a moment or two, was able to achieve the full flow out of the tap. He had been lucky to turn the tap the right way. On later occasions, he would sometimes screw it up till still tighter, chittering with irritation and disappointment at the tap's failure to cooperate. Very soon, Mijbil, that is Midge, would follow Maxwell without a lead and come to him whenever his name was called by the author. He spent most of his time in play, which is to say that Maxwell's otter really had a good time with him, especially when they both played together. He spent hours shuffling a rubber ball round the room like a four-footed soccer player, using all 4 feet to dribble the ball. And he could also throw it with a powerful flick of the neck to a surprising height and distance. So, the otter was extremely fond of playing, especially with a rubber ball, and would spend hours using all of his 4 feet to take the rubber ball around the room. But the real play of an otter is when he lies on his back and juggles with small objects between his paws, somewhat like an infant. Marbles were Mitchbill's favorite toys. For this pastime, he would always lie on his back, rolling two or more of them up and down his wide flat belly without ever dropping one to the floor, which tells us how extremely fond Mijbil was of lying on his back and playing with marbles. So far, there are other significant terms as well that we have come across which are equally important to comprehend and learn about so that we can know precisely what the chapter is all about. Thraldom is old fashioned, being under the control of something. Fixation is a very strong attachment to something. Christian is used for the activity of being named, and medievally conceived is an imagination of Middle Ages or a form of thinking which identifies the time period of the Middle Ages. Hostile is somewhat in a very angry, conflict ridden, and unfriendly manner. Apathy is the absence of interest or any keen enthusiasm or inclination towards a thing. Fumbling is trying to do something in a very clumsy manner. Provoking, causing anger or some other reaction. So to speak, in this particular context, it is used as an expression as it were. One could say this. Aloof and indifferent means keeping a certain distance and not reacting in any significant manner. Flick is a quick and a light movement. Let's discuss the few questions that we should be addressing so far in the chapter. Before we start to discuss and answer them, let's take a moment and think about them. So now, let's begin with the first question. What experiment did Maxwell think Camus would be suitable for? The answer to this question is that the writer had gone to southern Iraq in the year 1956. He took a fancy to the idea that instead of keeping a dog as a pet, he would go for an otter. Camus was surrounded by water, so it would be an eminently suitable spot for this particular experiment. Let's now look into question number 2. Why does he go to Basra? How long does he wait there and why? The writer, that is Maxwell, went to Basra to collect and answer his mail from Europe. He had to wait there for 5 days as his mail did not arrive. Let's now look into question number 3. How does he get the otter? Does he like it? Pick out the words that tell you this. The answer to this question could be that Maxwell, the author's friend, bought the otter for him and sent it to the place where he was staying. The author really liked it. This is seen in the second night Mijbil came onto my bed in the small hours and remained asleep in the crook of my knees. This is the particular line and the specific words that tell us this. I made a body belt for him. Let's now look into question number 4. Why was the otter named Maxwell's otter? The answer to this could be that the otter was named by the zoologists as Lutrogale perspiliata maxwelli. Hence, it was called as Maxwell's otter in simple and short words. Let's now look into the further questions that we have for us. Here, question number 5 asks us to take the right answer. In the beginning, the otter was number 1, aloof and indifferent. Number 2, friendly. Number 3, hostile. The answer to this could be, the answer to question number 5 is that in the beginning, the otter was aloof and indifferent. Question number 6 says, what happened when Maxwell took Mijbil to the bathroom? What did it do 2 days after that? The answer to this question could be that when the author first took Mijbil to the bathroom, the otter first went wild and happy with joy in the water, and by being in the bathtub, he was extremely having fun and was extremely at ease and peace with the author. He plunged and rolled in it. He jumped up and down the length of the bathtub he was in. He made enough slosh and splash in the bathroom. Then, after 2 days, the otter suddenly disappeared and went to the bathroom as Maxwell was entering the room and went on to play in the water and even opened the tap on his own. Let's now look further into the chapter. The days passed extremely peacefully at Basra, but Maxwell, the author, dreaded the prospect of transporting Mijbil to England as he had to move and then to Camusfair now. The British airline to London would not fly animals at all. So, because of this shortcoming and challenge, Maxwell booked a flight to Paris on another airline and from there to London. The airline insisted that Mijbil should be packed into a box of not more than 18 inches square. So, there was a direction that came from the airline which was ready to fly Mijbil, which said that for Mijbil, in order to be flown, had to be packed in a box of a certain dimension, and the dimension of the box could not exceed the dimension and measurement of 18 inches square. So, in order to be carried on the floor at Maxwell's feet in the flight, he had to be fit into that box. So, the author made a box, and an hour before they started, he put Mijbil into the box so that he would become a little accustomed and adjust to it, and therefore left for a hurried meal. When Maxwell returned, there was an appalling spectacle. There was complete silence from the box, but from its air holes and chinks around the lid, blood had trickled and dried. I whipped off the lock and tore open the lid, and Midge, exhausted and blood spattered, whimpered and caught at my leg. So, as Maxwell went to have his meal, and as he came back after his meal, he saw the box in which he had kept his otter was filled with sprinkles of blood around. As he opened the box to see, he found that Mijbil was extremely exhausted and tired and blood spattered, that is, with blood around himself and the box he was in. As soon as he opened the box, Mijbil came close to Maxwell's leg. Moving on, it was observed by Maxwell that Mijbil had torn the lining of the box into several pieces. When he removed the last of the pieces of the box, it was such that there was no cutting edges left, and at that point of time, there were just 10 minutes left until the time of departure of the flight, and the airport was 5 miles distant. So, he also put the miserable otter back into the box, holding down the lid with his own hands. So, he had torn the lining of the box to shreds. When I removed the last of it so that there was no cutting edges left, it was just 10 minutes until the time of the flight, and the airport was 5 miles distant. I put the miserable Midge back into the box, holding down the lid with my hand. I sat in the back of the car with the box beside me as the driver tore through the streets of Basra like a ricocheting bullet. So, since there was very less time and a great distance to cover for the flight and for them to reach the airport, Maxwell sat at the back of the car which drove him to the airport in a very extremely high speed, and the box in which the otter was kept with him was right beside him. The aircraft at the airport, in which Maxwell and Otter had to go back to Europe, was waiting to take off. He was rushed through it by some officials and people who were connected to the airline in an extremely angry and impatient manner. However, Because of their good luck, the seat that was booked for Maxwell was at the extreme front, so he did not have to go all the way till the end of the aircraft to take his seat. Maxwell covered the floor which was around his legs with a lot of newspapers and also called for the people who managed the aircraft, that is, the air hostesses, and then gave the air hostess a parcel of fish for Mijbil, his otter, to keep in a cool place so that he could be fed later on. Therefore, the aircraft was waiting to take off. I was rushed through it by infuriated officials. Luckily, the seat booked for me was at the extreme front. I covered the floor around my feet with newspapers, rang for the air hostess, and gave her a parcel of fish for Mijbil to keep in a cool place. I took her into my confidence about the events of the last half hour. I have retained the most profound admiration for that air hostess. She was the very queen of her kind. She even suggested that I might prefer to have my pet on my knee, and I could have kissed her hand in the depth of my gratitude. But, not knowing otters, I was quite unprepared for what followed. So, as Maxwell came well adjusted to his seat in the aircraft, he was suggested by the air hostess that for the comfort of himself and his pet, he should keep his otter Mijbil around his knees. Seeing the suggestion of the air hostess, Maxwell was extremely full of gratitude and admiration for the kind air hostess. Mijbil was out of the box in a flash. He disappeared at high speed down the aircraft. There were squawks and shrieks, and a woman stood up on her seat, screaming out, "A rat! A rat!" So, as it happened to be so, Maxwell did not expect the events to unfold in a very rushed manner. As soon as he put Mijbil, his otter, on his lap, he jumped out of the box in a second and ran across the aircraft. As he ran across the aircraft, people sitting around panicked and, out of scare and fear, shouted at the sight of spotting a rat. I caught sight of Mid's tail disappearing beneath the legs of a portly white turbaned Indian. Driving for it, I missed, but found my face covered in curry. "Perhaps," said the air hostess with the most charming smile, "it would be better if you resumed your seat, and I will find the animal and bring it to you." I returned to my seat. So, as it happened to be so that Mijbil escaped the box he was kept in, he went on to dive across the legs of a white turban Indian, and as Maxwell went on to catch him and take hold of him, his face dipped in the food that the Indian was eating, that is, the curry. However, the air hostess came to his rescue and suggested that he must return to the seat in order to maintain decorum as well as decency around the ethics of the aircraft, and that she would go and find the animal and bring it back to him. I was craning my neck trying to follow the hunt when suddenly I heard from my feet a distressed chitter of recognition and welcome, and Mijbil bounded onto my knee and began to nuzzle my face and my neck. Although unexpected, as Maxwell was trying to keep a check on, on his otter, which just happened to escape him in the flash of a second, also felt very surprised at the sight of Mijbil coming back to him and also muzzling his face and neck, even though he surprised him at the very sight of having come back in another minute or so.